Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to our webinar this month. We're going to be talking about knowledge management, the knowledge management imperative, why KM is so essential and critical to artificial intelligence. And today we have Dan Miller and Jen Snell as our guests, and we're going to be hearing from them shortly. But before we get started, I want to thank our marketing partners, our sponsors, CMS Wire and the Marketing AI Institute, both terrific resources for you. So Dan, do you want to just say who you are quickly before we jump in?
Sure, and thanks, Seth. I'm really excited about this session here. I'm Dan Miller. I'm, as it says here, lead analyst and founder of Opus Research. We're a market intelligence firm that has addressed what we call conversational technologies for some 35 years.
Terrific. And how about yourself, Jen?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Jen Snell. I lead go-to-market for conversational AI at Verint. We're the customer engagement company. I'm very excited to be participating in this panel with you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm still Seth Early, and even though my LinkedIn profile says I'm Seth Hearly, I'm actually Seth Early. So
interesting.
Fix that next time, but if you run it all together, it still works. And I'm author of the AI-Powered Enterprise, which won an award and is really talking about the things that we're going to talk about today. A little bit of housekeeping. We're recording, so you can listen to this at your leisure, pass it on to colleagues. We're going to shoot for about 50 minutes, depending upon how verbose we get, and tend to have spirited conversations. So we'll try to leave some time for Q&A. And we do have some polls, so we'd love to get your input on those polls. So our perspective, first we're going to hear from each of us. We're going to talk about our perspective, our frame of reference, how we look at this space and the issues and the challenges. And then we're going to discuss these two overarching themes, knowledge management and AI as an open discussion, and then the business justification for investment. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. In my basic premise, my perspective that I talk about and have talked about for many years is that cognitive AI runs on knowledge and content. Chatbots are a channel. They're a channel to anything that we have that we want to access. And again, you have to have the data and the content in order for that channel to work. But when you start looking at content, when we start looking at the data and the information behind the scenes, many times our content and our knowledge is very, very fragmented. We have different departments that have responsibility for things like, pre-sale support, proposal development, campaign management. There's engineering. All of these different parts of the organization create content in their silos. And then within those silos, there are more silos. There's more fragmentation. And what you find is this is very difficult for people to get their minds around. It's very difficult to start corralling this. And what we see is we then bolt on to all of this content operations for AI. That's what I've seen. I've seen this as a separate initiative. Why is that? The reason is because people are looking at the fact that all of this content in all of these different areas, and right now I'm equating knowledge and content just in terms of the fact that once we take knowledge and write it down, it becomes content, right? And the content behind the scenes is how we train our cognitive assistants, our virtual assistants, our chatbots, our knowledge bots, our conversational commerce, right? Something needs to feed them. We need to power them. And what happens with content operations for AI is people say, well, wait a minute, we have to be very, very focused on the use case, very focused on the needs of this particular task, very focused on the specific content to answer questions or to power these bots. Guess what? That's how we should do content anyway, right? I tell the story of being at an organization that was a Medicare administrative contractor, and I held up a piece of content. This is 20 people that were creating hundreds of pieces of content every week. Held up a piece of content. I said, what is this? It was some kind of policy. I said, what is it for? Who's going to read it? Why? Nobody can answer that question. So when we start looking at building content for AI, we have to answer those questions. We have to be very specific about the problem we're trying to solve and exactly what that problem is and what that answer is. Now, what happens though, is it further fragments our content and our knowledge because now we're putting it in these individual systems. What we really need to do is we need to have content operations that have centralized standards and standard operating principles. The content can still be distributed in terms of its creation, but we need to have create once, publish everywhere, including to chatbots and virtual assistants. That is what this should be. It should not be content operations for AI. It should be content operations. One of our large customers has done this across their entire information ecosystem. They serve up 4 million knowledge transactions a day, and they do it to distribution partners, to channel partners, to customer self-service, to the call center, to field service, to embedded content within equipment, that embedded intelligence, and they are powering their chatbots and virtual assistants. That is how this is going to be sustainable. So we need to get a handle on this. I've already stolen my thunder on this. Chat or channel. They're a channel to that knowledge and data. And if that content is not there, then we have a problem. If that knowledge is not there, we have a problem. And when we think about the whole idea of a bot or virtual assistant or conversational commerce, they are an information retrieval mechanism. Just like search is an information retrieval mechanism. And we can look at this on a continuum of increasing functionality and capability. If we have a knowledge base, well, basic search doesn't really require much because it derives and implies metadata, right? It actually indexes things. Keywords, full text query, that's the search experience. That's the white box and getting back hundreds of documents. But we really don't want hundreds of documents. We want an answer. And in order to do that, we have to have a more sophisticated architecture, have a more sophisticated user experience. We have to have other types of enabling technologies. It's not to say that there's a fine line between virtual assistant, virtual agent, intelligent assistant, the difference is these things. No, this is just a continuum to start thinking about that functionality. And again, when we have more metadata, when we have a richer semantic architecture, that allows us to be able to retrieve that information more effectively. Now, one of the things we have to think about is what is the right structure for managing and organizing this information. And one of the things that we have is when we look at information architecture at an enterprise level, it can be very, very complex. But when we're looking at this, and this is where I'm referring to a knowledge architecture, a knowledge use case, a retrieval use case takes a subset of design and a subset of content. So it's really more focused on the tasks at hand. And we have to build the controlled vocabularies and the terminology and the isness and aboutness to power those use cases. So in other words, it's a subset, just like the content is a subset of the overall information ecosystem. But again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build this on standard terminology, standard vocabularies. And when we look at this, this is how we have to think of our content. We need to take that monolithic content that is in documents such as training guides, product specifications, troubleshooting, FAQs. We have to break it up. We have to componentize it so we can build a question answering system. We have to be able to get the specific answer. When we did this for a health insurance company, took a 300-page anesthesia claims document and broke out, well, what is the policy for this particular situation under claims processing? That's what people want. They want the answer, not a 300-page document. When we componentize that content, break it into those chunks, we can reuse it. We can use it for customer self-service. We can use it for the call center. We can use it to monitor the value of assets and consumption of assets and KPIs. And we can power conversational assistants and virtual bots. That's my perspective. Again, there's a lot more behind this. I could spend hours on this topic. We have workshops and so on, but I wanted to keep that part short so we don't kill you with slides, but let's have a poll. So Sharon should be bringing up a poll now. The question is, where are you on your knowledge journey? And Sharon, is that coming up? Do you see it? Oh, there it is. Okay, great. So where are you in your knowledge journey? So the question is, are you looking at your knowledge architecture, your knowledge management, your knowledge engineering? Many times people are making efforts. Many times they've tried and then they're not sustainable. And if it's none of the above, by the way, be sure to let us know in chat or in the Q&A. Mm-hmm. I don't know, whether that applies or not, if there's another one. And again, what you're seeing here is you're saying that there's a lot of efforts that have gone on. There's pockets of deployments. but very few organizations are very mature across the enterprise. That's the nature of the beast these days. These days, it's very difficult because of that fragmented nature, because of the distributed ownership, because of the way we have silos of knowledge. But at the end of the day, we need to build that centralized capability with centralized standards. Okay, we have one that's very mature. I want to know who that is. I want to pick your brain. And how did you get there? And how long did it take? These are long-term efforts, right? These don't happen in a 6-month period of time. It's building that capability over time. All right, let's go ahead and finish up the poll. We still have a couple of people trickling in. Let's go ahead and share those results. And so that's where we are. So it looks like, one out of our 20 respondents, and I know there's more people on the call than 20, but that's okay. Not everybody wants to participate. There should be another question here on how many refuse to participate in the poll.
And get the demographics on that.
What's that?
No, it's a very interesting distribution. I was going to say if you got the non-participant cohort to just sort of characterize them would be interesting. But
yeah, and I am curious about the none of the above. But again, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations are really trying to make these efforts, and then there are standalone issues with those other pieces. Thank you for participation. Any other observations that you guys want to make here?
There is a member of the audience that wants you to move back one so we can articulate a question. There you go.
Just to take a look at.
And then we can proceed on and then come back and get the question.
Absolutely, and we can talk about component authoring. And we can talk about those other things. But let's turn it over to Dan. Dan,
sure.
What is your perspective on this space? And let me. I'm going to move to the. Should I just move to the first?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So just real quick, I mentioned we'd been around for 35 years. So back in '86, we were looking at automated contact centers, and it was sort of the first place that computers informed either individual agents, basically individual agents, but screens on desks that corresponded with a communications channel. And there's been 35 years for that to evolve into sort of a ripe framework for exactly what Seth just depicted. I think we compiled our first map of an AI ecosystem going back 10 years and by IA here, we meant intelligent assistance as opposed to artificial intelligence in general.
Or information architecture, right?
Right, or information architecture for those here. And we've done ongoing analysis of what we now call conversational intelligence, which is a very, very important thing to bring up here, as well as intelligent assistance and IOF. And let's move past this. We're a firm that, but back in October, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to bring this up. We were asked to say, hey, what are the major trends in those areas we're covering that will give shape to the conversational commerce domain? And one of the things we were saying is what's now being called conversational AI, which as Opus, we like to narrow down to essentially being around natural language processing, machine learning, a certain amount of analytics that kind of oozes over into being cognition, is becoming something of a commodity. It's a component to solutions. So this sort of conforms with Seth's diagram there of this. I like the COPE model to do it once and then render it over and over again. This is a key component to that is just the resources that enable machines and other people actually to understand an individual's intent based on the words we use, which are sometimes very inaccurate. The second thing, and we write a lot for the contact center industry, is that we think conversations are replacing contact centers. When you have individuals using their own words, using the devices that they're familiar with, at the times they want to, there really isn't a single sender that receives all that. That what you essentially have is this ongoing asynchronous conversation between individuals and the companies that they want to do business with. And relating back to Seth's presentation, I would say it brings a real-time component to delivering the right information. So if that conversational AI front end is essentially charged with understanding what you want or what you're searching for, then the resources that match what's going on in this like huge cloud of structured and unstructured data and presenting it in real time is the challenge, which means this third bullet, which Seth and I and Jen as well will talk about. We think that smart search, in the spirit of what how people have like learned to use Google as a search slot and then Google as an assistant, has trained us to do, is that something like a smart search is supplanting knowledge management. And whoops, we jumped. and part and parcel of that is that conversational intelligence, this residue, if you will, of successful conversations. The idea that we're capturing all the conversations and the right responses and keeping it as a permanent record of what individuals have asked for and what the successful response is replacing is the voice of the customer, as opposed to sort of a post poll. And then this fifth bullet is kind of heavy, because we're going to talk about the business case and how it's built. Automation had been the driver, and automation had been sort of the code word for replacing people with automated systems. And the early ROI has always been based on that. But the fact that we're having successful, that we're applying conversational intelligence and conversational resources to promote successful outcomes that lead to longer retention, that lead to sales and that sort of thing, means that we're reframing how you regard your investment in knowledge management, in automation, in quote conversational AI. Hope I didn't take too long there.
Oh, that was great. And one of the things that when you say smart search is supplanting knowledge management, I know we've had good discussions around it. We'll discuss it more. But search requires that we have the stuff to search on, right? And the search,
correct,
good content. And somebody mentioned in the chat that it's really about having templates and structure and metadata around those articles, and that's absolutely the case. It's exactly what we need to do. Terrific. And this was kind of a diagram that talks a little bit about. Any comment that you want to make on this?
Yeah. So and this relates to all of those points. But what we're seeing, and perhaps conversations are replacing contact centers. Analysts like myself tended to divide the world into, especially as stuff moved to the cloud, be it AWS or Azure or whatever, that we would parse things into CCaaS, contact center as a service, or unified communications as a service, or communications platforms as a service. And what we're finding as we look at how enterprise decision makers are considering their next investment, it's not conforming to those lines. And that what we need to look at is 4 pillars of what Opus is calling the conversational cloud, which if you look in the upper left, we're really talking about, and this would have to do with these intelligent assistants, stuff that supports self-service in the natural language processing, the automated speech processing, the application of machine learning and building intelligent assistants, supported by a foundation of routing or understanding stuff and then connecting people to the resources they need, which we used to think of as contact centers as a service. But even those guys, as they move to the cloud, are saying, we're not just connecting person to IVR, person to agent or virtual agent. We're rooting what's understood as the intent of an individual to the resources wherever they may reside. And that's becoming very dynamic. And that's what we call conversational intelligence. So I alluded to all these terms. So this just sort of clarifies that. the missing piece, or an important missing piece, and I think this gets into what you're talking about, Seth, and I think what Jen's going to talk about. There's some curation and preparation and integration and orchestration that is really, really important to make sure that you get rid of latencies, that stuff works, that the responses are accurate and consistent. So that's what we tried to capture in this. And I think it gives us a good framework for the rest of this discussion and perhaps in informing investments by enterprises.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Let's take another poll. So Sharon, you should be able to have this. How would you describe KM for artificial intelligence? Is there no connection? Are they siloed? Or is the organization able to reuse knowledge for retrieval, for cognitive assistance, but maybe it's a separate process? Or are you looking at knowledge is created once and published everywhere? Really that create once, publish everywhere. So go ahead and take a minute to take care of that. And again, I don't know if we had the last time someone said none of the above. If you want to share that in chat, that would be great. But it looks like we have some people knowledge created once, published everywhere. That's fantastic. Looks like we have some folks, again, it's a siloed effort. There's some reuse. Popcorn is still popping. I'm going to give that another moment or two, right? When things are still coming in. So you have another moment. If you want to please participate, select one of the above. That would be terrific. Maybe we can get to or exceed our 20 participant number from the last one. 15, we're up to 15. Do I see 16? Yes, 16. 16 going once, 16 going twice. Do we have 17? Can I see 17? 17, 18. Can we get to 20? I want a 20. Come on, a couple more people. Maybe not. All right. I won't take too much time. Oh, we got 18. We got 18.
All right.
Anyone else? Any other takers? 18 going once. 19. All right. I think we're going to make it. 19 going once. 19 going twice. 20. All right. You succeeded. Thank you for your participation, everyone. You could still, 21. We're exceeding it. Boy, people are just starting to get warmed up now. But thank you for all of that. And now we're sharing this. So see that there's a lot of folks that are saying there's no connection. A couple of folks are doing create once, publish everywhere. Fantastic, right? That's great. Then we want to hear what those challenges are, what the next steps are, and so on. And then doing it through a separate process. And again, for the none of the above, anybody has shared that in the chat. None of the above, working early stages. Okay, understood. Let's see, Dan knows my thoughts in conversational intelligence. Becomes first order in a contact center. Not sure I agree they replace. Okay, that's legitimate. I would have to say my belief is that it augments and maybe a longer term, maybe replaced 4 years ago, it was conversational middleware, which has become journey orchestration, which adds next best action, which may be another channel. Yep. So that makes a lot of sense. And again, all of these things are really trying to anticipate what does a customer need, right? We're taking in a signal and that signal is an utterance. We're trying to understand the intent and then we're trying to respond to that intent.
And we really should try to get Mitch in on our next call when we discuss this. Because,
all right, that sounds great.
Yeah, you'll find there's just a lot of great insight by practitioners as opposed to third-party analysts who know what the first order concerns are. And
totally agree. That's totally agree. So Jen, let's perspective, and then we'll do some more discussion. Do you want me to go?
Yeah, sounds good. Hi everyone again. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the why of why knowledge is such an imperative and the trends around it. I've been working in the space of conversational AI for, I can't believe it, over 15 years now. At Verint, our open platform processes over 10 billion customer interactions every year. If you're not familiar with Verint, we are very focused on customer engagement and delivering experience management, digital first, and workforce engagement technologies that break down those silos, that connect brands with their customers and employees. Helping organizations harness data to drive AI and analytics, which is important because when it comes to AI-powered anything, you have to have quality data, which we've been touching on. It's really that starting point for foundational elements like conversational AI and knowledge management. So You know, recent changes, I think we're all really familiar with this concept, right? This is key because there's so much change happening in the market, especially over the last few years. You know, we're almost seeing like this Cambrian explosion of AI projects coming out at us everywhere. And the shift to digital and the changes from it are really here to stay. Consumers are increasingly using digital and self-service channels to engage, and their expectations continue to skyrocket. You know, as the number of, you know, channels consumers use increase, you know, it takes a toll on the brands because they're faced with increasingly complex customer journeys, and they have to really understand how customers want to engage and be able to effectively manage those interactions. And then it's not just the customers, because employee expectations have also increased as well. You know, even as the pandemic, I think I read an article today, it's coming to a close, knock on wood. We're still seeing an increase in work from home, work from anywhere, and hybrid work environments. And we're also seeing generational shifts, right? Changing what people expect from their employers. As Gen Z, or as I like to call them, AI natives, enter the workforce, they're expecting intuitive tools to help them do their jobs, and knowledge is a key piece of that. Go ahead to that next slide. There we go. With the, you know, so with these increasing expectations and options, organizations are in a pretty tough place. They need to get ahead of those demands, and, you know, typically don't have unlimited resources. In most cases, we're seeing those resources flatten or even decrease. So when it comes to creating what, you know, enduring relationships, there's this gap that on what organizations need to do and the resources they have to actually do it. You know, it'd be nice if we could give one representative to every single person, and you know, a concierge to everything for your brand, but that costs like $1 gazillion and it's not sustainable at all. So this is what we call the engagement capacity gap. And without the right foundational elements like knowledge and AI, it's a problem that stands to get worse over time. And it really negatively impacts both the customer and the employee experience. It's kind of this vicious cycle. So to close that gap, go ahead for that next slide. To close that gap, you know, it's the right foundational elements. They have to help you do things like accommodate customer preferences for digital first engagement, with a huge emphasis on customer-centric convenience, making it very convenient for your customers and your employees. They have to power today's workforce, which is increasingly distributed by and augmented by bots. And they have to embrace and foster a customer-centric culture. So sharing that knowledge and intelligence and driving it across your business. And they need to be able to take the vast amount of data that you collect and make sense of it to apply to automation and take advantage of trends. There's a ton of work that's going into you know, even making sense of that data. And there's AI and tools, and we'll get into that in a little later in our discussions around how we can support that better. But finally, you know, anything we look to do must empower your digital transformation wherever you are on that continuous journey. So, you know, we talk to customers that are all spectrums of their digital transformation. So, and you know, with that, I think we're ready to dive into our discussion.
So again, I thought we had another poll. We did not have another poll. Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you for that, Jen. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have some broader discussion about knowledge management and AI. I thought I changed this slide to a question, so I don't see that question in here. But when we talk about this as a consumer-centric approach or customer-centric approach, what does that really mean? And when we talk about conversational intelligence, you started to hit on that, Dan, but what is it that, what else does that consist of? I mean, we talked about the knowledge pieces of it, and again, we can broadly cover all of these, but, you know, when we already hit on this, but, you know, let's dig in a little deeper about how this supports these projects. So let's take the first one. What's the customer or consumer-centric approach? Who would like to jump onto that?
I'll go first. The term I like to use is we've redefined self-service. And by self-service used to mean, hey, this is automated handling, you're using an IVR or something like that, you're not involving people. But true self-service, I think, means that, as opposed to saying, when a company says, hey, we're customer eccentric, we're customer centric, they used to mean that, or it normally means they capture a lot of information about individuals and they tailor responses. It's related to personalization, efficient answering of questions or resolving issues. But real customer centricity would be centered around the individual user, meaning that you highly value what they say, and you listen very efficiently to what they're saying. And you actually capture it, of course, with their permission, which means that you are collecting and archiving the utterances between, or the conversations between individuals and agents. And that becomes an important part of the unstructured data that has to be merged with the other stuff and tagged and templated, however you want to do it, to make it serviceable for those consistent answers in the future.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that it really points to the need to model out those use cases and those scenarios and identify the differences between customer segments, right? So we're really trying to understand, what do they need in this scenario, mapping out that customer lifecycle, that journey. And, at the end of the day, when we think about why people would call a call center, they do that because something is broken, right? Something's not right. So if we are understanding that full journey, let's stop them before they have to call the call center. And let's try to anticipate that need and try to serve up that information and really try to engage before they frustrated or before they pick up the phone, right? And so part of it is saying, can we integrate that into that overall user experience, which may be the use of a bot, but it may also simply be the way we surface information for them. One of the things that I find incredibly annoying is when I go to a website and I simply want to, I'll just stop my share for a second so we can just focus on people. When I go to a website and I have these bots that are constantly popping up, can I help you? What would you like? Can I ask you a question? Are you here to do this? And I was on some site today and I just wanted to look around. And every time I did that, another one pops up and asks me a question and I exit out. And then another one pops up and I exit out. And another one pops up and I exit out. And it's like, you know what? I don't even want to be on this site because it's so annoying. So,
son of Clippy.
Yeah. But so go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
What I'm interested in from synthesizing what we've said and what you just said, I'm interested in Jen's take, because one of the things we're hearing from the decision makers in enterprises, they want certain things to work out of the box, whether they're, and it can be topic related, but I think that, from my understanding of Verint's offering, there's some 0-day or out of the box capabilities that are based on sort of the past history of conversations on particular topics.
Yeah. There is. And I think going back to like that consumer centric approach, it kind of goes into, what we find is no one really cares about your product. They only care about getting their problem solved. And so having that approach and thinking about not only understanding what the customer is after needs, but anticipate their needs. You've got to, at this point, to be customer centric, you've got to know them, you've got to value them, you have to empower them, make it easy, you have to be frictionless, proactive, and even protect them at some level. I think to your point, Dan, about data and sharing that, but you have to understand not only what they want, but how and why in order to support them. And that's where we've been focused with our conversational AI specifically, is around the how and why in which people engage with brands across different domains, across use cases. And that's a library of labeled data that can be applied to different taxonomies on mapping up sort of what the context of the user is with the context of the business in order to drive those resolutions in a seamless, proactive way.
Let's see, here's a question. Different types of, a general question I have is how different types of AI are combined to address these use cases? That is, how are ontologies combined with machine learning algorithms? An application area I'm thinking of is recommendation engines. Is a great question. And so when you start thinking about personalization, right? Personalization is, you can have identity personalization, right? Which is just saying, hi Dan, right? That's not really personalization. Or you can have a personalization that's really has a value, utilitarian, something that is a recommendation. And that's based on understanding something about Dan and saying, hey, here's what I recommend that you do. But think about it this way. Search is a recommendation, right? When you put a term into a search engine, well, here's what I think you're asking for. Here's my recommendation of content. When you're doing something with a bot, you're putting in an utterance. Here's the answer that I recommend, right? I think there's a bunch of choices here. And that's why human curation is very important when we're starting to train our bots, right? Because there may be a number of potential choices that need to be selected or prioritized. There may be a confidence level, but really it is a recommendation engine. So when you start thinking about this, what does an ontology do for us, or a knowledge graph? It gives us the reference data. It tells us what's important, in terms of the names of products, the types of customers, the characteristics of customers, the attributes of products, the product categories. All of those things form that knowledge scaffolding, or that framework upon which machine learning algorithms can operate, right? Because it's giving the algorithm the basis for making recommendations. It's saying, here's something I know about the customers. Here's something I know about the products. Here's something I know about, classification of this utterance into an intent. Maybe that intent has multiple dimensions, right? When you're asking multiple things, people think of it as slotting, but it could also be some kind of semantic deconstruction. But the whole point is that is used by the engine in order to help contextualize the response, right? I still look at this from a perspective of that knowledge architecture, right? You have to tag the content. We're using, automated approaches, machine learning approaches, manual approaches, hybrid approaches, contextual approaches, but we still have to say, what's the source of truth around that reference terminology that we're using to tag that content? Then that can be surfaced for that user based on the utterance and based on the other things we know about. So that whole information architecture you saw before that diagram, that's part of the knowledge graph. In fact, the knowledge graph is essentially an ontology plus data. Dan, did you want to?
Yeah. Well, we wandered a little afield of that question about customer centricity, and that's a good thing. And I'm seeing that Mitch said another thing here. I think one of the triggers and why I wanted to participate in this discussion with you, Seth, and it's based on something Jen mentioned in a call a while ago, that we think companies are underestimating the sort of investment in human resources and dollars in the hygiene that those processes that you talked about, and we're just learning that when Opus started covering enterprise intelligent assistants and talking to decision makers, they were trying to answer the question that people would ask, like, what's our bot strategy? And bots, there was like this rush to get virtual assistants in there. It got accelerated when the pandemic came along, and we were trying to find something that could handle a certain amount of the routine questions. And then there's a whole lore about it frees up your live agents to do more interesting stuff and things like that. But is it a digital employee instead of like hygiene on the knowledge base? Are you just coming up with rules to train a digital employee, and you're using the knowledge as almost like the training material? And then what is the role, and so there's some knowledge management that goes on pre-deployment. And then there's some element of machine learning that helps refine the questions that are asked. And then, but there's this role for people to intervene, you know, as supervisors sort of. But anyway, and each of those sort of costs money.
Yeah. And Jen, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to what both of you have said, you know, I think AI should really be helping you work faster and more efficiently and make better use of your time. It's about, you know, it's tools really, you know, can automate decision making, it can control and monitor processes and understand customer needs. So you can build up these ontologies very, very quickly by, you know, through NLP and machine learning, by understanding and grouping these like things together. But you've got to have that element of a human, you know, some sort of human trainer, right? That the AI can make recommendations, but it's really up to, you know, the AI should be making recommendations so you're no longer looking for the needles in the haystack or guessing at what needs to be done next. You're really taking an evidence-based approach to what customers or employees are looking for from your knowledge and needing from the business. And so, you know, the AI should be making recommendations to you or the human trainer that then you can decide, like, you know, in some cases, you know, some of the queries may not even make sense for the business. So, you know, we've seen a lot of that actually. Like, you know, sometimes people are going to ask, once you open it up, you know, people ask anything. And then, you know, or sometimes it's, you know, yeah, we should answer that. And then sometimes it's either, you know, yeah, you know, we should answer that. And oh, by the way, we already have that. Or, you know, we should probably teach or build some knowledge around this, and maybe there's an opportunity to build other elements across the business to support this, because this is a trend that's unfolding because of, you know, maybe something that's happening, or you know, business is never static, it's constantly evolving. So I think going back to this idea, you know, when it comes to whether it's a chatbot as a channel or anything, it's these things aren't static. Once you open a messaging channel or any of these channels, you start driving a new stream of data. And so you've got to be able to have, and this is really important because it's not set it and forget it. Once you go live with one of, you know, any sort of automation, it's after go live that things really start to get interesting. And so you've got to have AI and machine learning tools that help you make sense of that data much faster and apply it in meaningful ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, when you talk about, you know, deriving ontologies, you can certainly get the foundational pieces for that. I still think that ontologies do require huge human judgment and curation. Yep. But to your point, Dan, before when you were saying we're getting a little bit away from customer centricity, I think that recommendation engines are really the ultimate of customer centricity, right? Because you're trying to understand that user and trying to say, well, what do I think they need? There's an observation in the chat that it's saying that, you know, it's recognizing people and associating past interactions and representing that in the metadata model that represents the user, right? We have to model the user. That's where first party data comes into play. That's where those different touch points, there's metadata that moves slowly about what industry they're in and who they are and what their interests are, maybe what they purchased, but then there's stuff that happens real time. That's that digital body language that we also need to take in as a signal to be able to surface whatever it is that we want to surface. And that can work for chatbots as well, right? If we know that somebody is asking a particular question, if we know something about their background and they're a very technical audience versus a layperson audience, that can also impact what we are surfacing. The other comment that was made here is when you're adding KM to AI, there's a clash of practitioners. They come from different perspectives. Adding human-centered design, it was the bridge. So I think that makes a lot of sense in that the whole idea of being able to make sure that we're not trying to do this just with data and statistical approaches, that we are adding KM to that process, because that knowledge does have to be there, especially in regulated industries. And when you start thinking about what you need to train in AI, to your point, Jen, you know, it doesn't stop. It's just like knowledge. You stop with knowledge when you stop with, you know, information architecture, when you stop with sales and manufacturing and operations, right? Mm-hmm. You stop, because it always is a dynamic and changing environment. And just like you train humans, you have to train these tools, and the tools, the same train humans, you need to train the tools. The technology requires that ingestion of that content. So great. And by the way, we are just taking questions as we're going here. So let me go ahead and share again, and we'll take another, we'll look at another point here.
Well, we've organically moved to the second question.
We have, yes, we have.
Which is, what is conversational intelligence? And
yeah.
Whoops. There we go.
Well, conversational intelligence, yes. I think we've been kind of hitting this. I was thinking we would go to the next slide. Unless there's other comments you want to make here, we can go to the next slide about business.
Well, I just want to emphasize what Jen said and you as well said. But if you think of conversational intelligence as all the amalgam of resources that inform effective conversations, then yes, you are collecting on an ongoing basis those utterances and using those with human supervision, both to refine what the best answers are and to just continually update what Jen was saying. They're not static answers. More and more we're seeing intelligent assistants or virtual agents triggering transactions or doing dips into very dynamic data that's coming out of all of the process automation in the back end. So that gets
absolutely totally agree. And when you have large numbers of, like when I mentioned the 4 million knowledge transactions, large tech provider handles, you need to add more intelligence to those responses, right? Because even if you still have 4 million of them, well, what's the right and technical content in some cases? What's that right piece of content for this engineer doing this with this equipment and under this circumstances, et cetera, with this error code, right? And those are additional signals that add to the conversational intelligence. So I totally agree. And you're pulling dynamic data at the same time. So I think we kind of hit on these things in terms of, to me, it's at the center. Knowledge is really at the center, whether we call it knowledge management or not. There's knowledge and content that has to be curated and understood and analyzed. So when we talk about these things from the business, and by the way, if you have questions, just send them up because we're taking this as we go. When we start thinking about the business case, I mean, a lot of these are long-term initiatives. The customer that I mentioned before did this over several years, right? They spent tens of millions of dollars building that create once, publish everywhere capability because they had to really operationalize this throughout the organization. And that has saved them hundreds of millions of dollars. But still, organizations don't really think of those long-term investments in those programs. They treat things like projects versus programs. So how do you make, there's two pieces to this. Number one is you really need a lot of foundational investment in some cases. And you have to think about this on a long-term basis. And how do you make sure that those investments are producing value, especially in the knowledge area? Now, for call center deflection, for call center productivity, there's tons of metrics around that. But if you're trying to go a little beyond that and look at other types of efficiencies and overall knowledge processes, I mean, that's when you start getting into more nuanced knowledge and higher performing, higher skilled types of workers. So why don't we just talk a little bit about that, that business case? And, the way I look at this is you need that excuse case, right? Reason why you're doing this that can easily be justified. And then you have a lot of other stuff you can do along the way. So you guys want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing for business case?
I'll let Jen go first.
Well, I think, for us, the business case takes on a lot of shapes and forms, right? In a variety of areas. The key for us to start, kind of start small. I mean, this is a bit more on the conversational AI side and making sure that we're driving efficiencies, whether it's cutting costs or growing revenue. It doesn't always have to be about cutting costs. It can be about growing revenue and driving brand engagement. We've seen, those junky little chatbots that, are trying to drive brand engagement by engaging you every time you are on a website. That's not a good way to do it. But, I think the big thing really is to find that area of what are customers after? What are they trying to do? Can we analyze some unstructured data from your calls or live chats or search queries, and understand what are they trying to do? How are they trying to do it? The characteristics around which those things are, like, is this a pretty easy self-service solution? Does it require some level of human element? Does it require complex multi-turn solutions? And then understand, the business goals. What within your business are you trying to accomplish? And start there, and then find the intersection. And we can do this through natural language processing and AI technologies. Find the way where you can intersect those two things. The other way, we've been at this for a long time. So Dan made the point earlier, there's a lot of day zero out of the box, like, hey, if this is what you're trying to accomplish, here's what you can expect, or here's what we can do, here's what you can expect. We already know what the ROI is going to, in most cases be, and then start to grow from there. So you got go live, and then you start to increase it beyond, because once you drive those cost savings, then we can turn around and invest it in other ways, in other areas. But it is about it is about having that vision of where you want to go. We talk to a lot of businesses that are looking at automation first and automation everywhere. So how do we start small and then drive for this goal of automation first and automation everywhere?
Yeah. And Jen said the magic word, because I'll hark back to my 5th bullet point in my what we were thinking about coming into this year. ROI is driven by the automation story, and automation traditionally meant replacing a lower cost resource with, or replacing a high cost resource, your labor, with inexpensive automation. But that's sort of the low-hanging fruit. That's how you justify the investment. But we're learning in the long run, they're justifying based on a user experience story. So, and user experience internally means you're making your employees more productive, and you can document that in a bajillion different ways, bajillion being hyperbole. And then there's the CX story for the customer experience. And when you improve that, there's the retention, the lifetime value, there's an impact on the top line. So all the early automation stuff was just sort of about savings. And now we're seeing more business plans in what we used to call soft dollar considerations, but they're putting KPIs around that. Just as predicted, it's no longer just an automation story. You're going to, we're seeing all this stuff about adding empathy, about improving the customer experience, and that's all the story about, hey, we'll retain customers if we do this right. So there you go.
Yeah, and I think the critical element here is baseline measures, right? What do you have for baselines? And call centers certainly have tons of measures, measuring everything: time per incident, first call resolution, et cetera, and customer satisfaction and likelihood to recommend and all those things. And the question is, what can you impact from baselines? I'll do a little plug here. This is an article of mine that was just featured in Harvard Business Review in a special topic issue of Best of Archive Edition. And it's really about, is your data infrastructure ready for AI? And this was about applied materials, where and that's the article. You can find this on HBR, but this is also in the newsstands, if you can find a newsstand. but the point is, it was for applied materials, and they save $50 million per year on their field service. This was not a bot. This was knowledge architecture, knowledge engineering. And they have 3,000 field service agents, and they saved 50% of their time looking for information, which was borne out by their log sheets and borne out by all their metrics that we were gathering. But they had 14 places to go for information. They centralized that, used an ontology, but the same thing can be used to serve up the information in a bot, right? That's why I say the same knowledge architecture can support problems that you're solving today, produce ROI, and also prepare you for more advanced things. And again, once we get past, the low complexity unambiguous use cases, the kind of the low-hanging fruit, where you have the knowledge models and you have the use cases and the simple recognition of the variations on how do I change my password, or I'm locked out, my computer is mad at me, or whatever, my credentials don't work. All of those are password change. Once you get beyond those typical kind of problems and use cases, now you're going to have to start to get into the really rich, detailed knowledge that is really subject matter expertise, and organizations have to be able to manage that and organize it. And again, it is, I might have mentioned in the abstract for this, I don't remember, but Gartner recently came out with a study that predicted that AI, knowledge management for artificial intelligence, is going to be the fastest growing and largest spend in AI. So KM for AI, largest spend, fastest growing segment. That means that this is going to be really important for organizations. We actually wrote an article about that. Sharon can drop that in the notes for the show, or she can drop it in the. We'll include it with the mailing. But again, the point here being that this is a critical area. It's getting more and more attention. These things run on knowledge, and we need to be able to do this at an enterprise scale and scope, especially as these types of virtual assistants get more highly specialized and are augmenting more skilled types of resources. So any closing thoughts, you guys? We have a couple of minutes. If anybody has any additional questions, what are your closing thoughts, Jen? What would you like to say?
Thank you again for having me. It's been wonderful. Just building on that KM for AI, I can definitely see why it's a huge emphasis area. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, right, is, with this explosion of bots and things, you now have built silos upon silos where you have disparate 14, 15, 16 different IVAs or AIs out there working. Having KM for AI is going to help unify your customer experience, build a unified taxonomy for your business, understand and work from that playbook together. So I think it's, I absolutely agree with the imperative, and I think it's going to be exciting.
Absolutely. Dan?
And I just want to thank you for convening this group. We brought up something that's really important regarding required investment in hygiene for all of the sources of the correct answers or actions, whether it's offered through a live agent or through a bot, to a live agent, a bot to end users. And I hear you.
Yeah.
I don't know the order of magnitude of the spend, but we just want to say, as much as we think you bring unstructured or structured data into the answer, we're finding that, as you mentioned, people want the answer. It tends to be more granular than some of the early stuff we saw. You can't just sort of say, hey, it's covered on this webpage or it's covered in that.
Read the manual, right?
Yeah, that would be a great answer. You'd have the RTFM bot. That would be perfect.
That's right. And the TLDR. Read bot. RTFM, read the friggin' manual.
Yeah, we're here to help.
Here's chapter 4, find it in there. Or here's the page, or here's the answer based on your in your situation in your particular piece.
But it's still a moving target to find the right answer within all that stuff. And machines, we're finding that there's some good stuff right at the front end to ingest all this stuff and figure it out. So
absolutely. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. We're going to give you 1 minute back to your day. So, and feel free to contact any of us. There's our details, and feel free to reach out, and we'll all be happy to chat.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Great.